Around 9 or 10 years ago, I was living with my mom, dad, and older sister in an old house in a very small village. Like when I say small, I mean its only main feature was a small church, and a few scattered houses occupied mostly by very old people. At the time it was the summer, so I wasn't at school or anything, and since we were so far in the middle of nowhere, I spent most of that time at home, glued to one screen or another. The usual routine was I'd wake up around 10 or 11 a.m. By this point, Mom, Dad, and sister had all left for work, so I had the house to myself. I'd go downstairs, make some toast, watch some random stuff on TV for an hour, before heading back to my room to continue with whatever game I was grinding through that particular day. The usual habits of a 17-year-old guy, cut off from the world by many fields. I should give a quick rundown of our house. It was an older cottage with 2 rooms upstairs, mine and my sister's, and everything else downstairs. As you walk up the stairs, you got to a very small landing, and could go either left to my room, or immediate right, my sister's room. Basically, the way this was laid out was that I could sit in my room with the door open, and my sister's room is directly opposite. I should also mention that the ceilings in both our bedrooms were slanted. We were basically in a large attic where the roof slanted down, because of where the slant met the wall. We had crawlspace that ran the length of the house on either side of the rooms, both with a small door to access them. These were mostly used for storing normal attic stuff like Christmas decorations and old forgotten toys. The doors to these were thin little things, about 4 feet tall with a small handle on the outside. This is important because turning these tiny doorknobs opened them, but only from the outside. If the door was pushed shut, with you inside, there was no way back out. I discovered this myself on more than one occasion. The door on my side ran along my room and along one wall in my sister's room, and hers ran along the other side. Along my room. This space was not very big. You had to crouch to stand in it, and most of the time you were in there, you were crawling on hands and knees. Anyway, this one morning I'm awoken to a familiar noise, some sort of small creature rustling around in the crawl space on my sister's side. I could hear this because my bed was against the wall that ran along it, not an unusual noise. Living in the countryside, we had mice almost constantly, and they pretty much had the run of the storage spaces, no matter how many traps were put down. I thought nothing of it, and got up and went off to begin my morning ritual of toast and television. The first odd thing I noticed was while watching TV. I could hear movement upstairs. My sister's room was directly above the living room, so I assumed she'd just not gone to work that day for whatever reason and continued munching. Around an hour or two later, I went back upstairs and booted my PC. As I was waiting, I turned around to my open door and faced my sister's closed one, and realized it was late in the day, and she had yet to leave her room, an odd thing since she normally parked up on the sofa in the living room on her days off and didn't move until our parents returned. I started to think that maybe she was at work, and I'd imagined the noise from upstairs. But as I mused this, I noticed the crack of light at the bottom of her door as a shadow passed by it. So there's definitely someone in there, so it must be her. I once again pushed it from my mind and went back to my PC. More time passed, and the thought came back to me. Why would she be at home but not leave? She only has a small TV in her room and no books. So what had she been doing in there all day? I glanced back around and again saw a shadow under the door. She was still moving around in there. I finally decided to go knock on her door. I knocked a few times and said her name. No answer. Weird, but maybe she had headphones or something on. I knocked a bit harder again and said her name again but louder. No answer. Alright, I thought, okay, I'm just going to go in, so I cracked the door open and peered round. I found an empty room. No one inside at all. Feeling slightly confused, but better that it was just my imagination. I stepped in properly and looked around and saw something that made me full-on panic. Near the bottom of her little door leading to the crawl space, there was a small hole that the mice had made to get in and out at the bottom. Really small, but just big enough to fit half of your hand through. There, coming through that hole, were 4 fingers holding the door shut from the inside. At first I thought, no, it can't be fingers, don't be stupid, until I watched them slowly creep back through the hole into the crawl space. I lost it. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me, and ran to my room. Being the stupid teenager I was, I grabbed what might be the most imposing weapon I could find, the fake Winchester rifle cap gun I got from Disneyland a few years previous. I figured that if whoever was hiding in that bedroom didn't believe it was a real firearm, I could at least hit them with it. I ran off downstairs to where my dogs were on the far side of the house and called my mom, who worked about a 5-minute drive from our house. She told me to stay put and that her and her manager were on their way. In this time, I made a small upgrade from fake plastic rifle to one of my dad's golf clubs. I felt much better with that. Finally, my mom and her boss, John, turn up, and I tell them everything leading up to this point. They say, okay, and we all set off upstairs to investigate. We get into my sister's room and I point to the door. I'll never know if my mom is just hard as nails. But while John and I watch, she marches over to the door, yanks it open and sticks her head in. A moment passes while she looks left and right, and John and I are preparing to yank her back from the clutches of the possible psycho murderer hiding in there. Before she shouts, "Chris, what the hell are you doing in there? Get out." Small amount of backstory. Chris was my sister's boyfriend. The night before, my dad had asked Chris to leave as he had stayed with us for around 5 days at this point. He said, "Okay, that's cool." And as far as Mom and Dad knew, he'd headed home. What really happened was, instead of leaving, him and my sister had planned to make it seem like he'd left, then he could stay another night. He then would wake up before my mom shouted my sister up for work like she did every morning, and would hide in the crawlspace and sleep there until everyone had left for the day. The one small hitch in the plan that they did not think of was, you guessed it, me. They'd forgotten I was home, and conveniently sat directly opposite the only exit for most of the day, so he was trapped. When I knocked, he hid himself behind the door and held it shut to prevent being locked in. Anyway, my mom swiftly told him to get the hell out and not come back. Sadly, this was not the last time we sat. The guy, as it turned out, he'd stolen quite a bit of money from my sister's room while he'd been hiding out, and then, because my sister makes terrible decisions, got her pregnant and proceeded to smash windows trying to get at her and the baby around a year later. For a while, we lived in the same city. When I went to uni, and he was spending time at the prison there for stabbing someone in a completely different town. As I mentioned earlier, the only rooms upstairs are mine and my sister's bedrooms. He'd been in there for close to 14 hours with no access to a toilet, but no worry for this guy because he had lots of empty bottles to piss in, which he kindly left behind for us to clean up. And finally, around a year later, as Mum was getting the Christmas decorations out, which were at the far back of the storage space, she found a small bag. I should mention, where she found it is exactly next to where my bed is on the other side of the wall. The rustling that woke me up that day, it was him, hiding his shit amongst our tinsel and tree. I have a phobia that goes by a few names, the fear of being watched. Whenever I see a doorway, a window, or virtually any surface that I believe someone could hide behind, I imagine a face peering out at me, staring. I imagine what I would do. What could I do? Around June of 2016, my mother and I were living in a small apartment. There was no basement or attic, obviously, but there was one tiny crawl space in the closet floor of my bedroom. I never looked in it. I suppose some people would be overwhelmed with curiosity, but my mind had already imagined all the worst scenarios. I decided to leave whatever dead bodies and ghosts were down there for whoever rented after us. It was a nice apartment. Small, but perfect for the two of us. We lived there for a few peaceful months, until the noises started. It was nothing extreme, just the odd bump in the night, and particularly scratching. My mom just brushed it off as rats in the walls. As long as they stayed in there, I saw no reason to get rid of them. A week or two later, I had already grown used to the noise. It became almost comforting. After all, I never really liked silence. That is, until I awoke one night to a different noise. A rolling sound, eerily similar to the sound my closet made when I opened it. I peeked my eyes open and looked over, but I couldn't make out anything in the dark. I thought maybe I saw something move, but I was well aware of how the mind plays tricks on you in the dark. There was only one way to find out. I turned on my light. When I turned on the light, I expected to just see a closet full of coats. It was an eye. Not just an eye, but the entire half of someone's face, barely visible in the tiny crack he had opened. He didn't even react to being caught. No smile, no fear, just watching. My heart has never beat faster than that night. I wish I screamed or maced him or anything, but I just stared back, frozen in time until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I began sobbing loudly. I think I tried to say something along the lines of, "What do you want?" But it was garbled by my crying. He opened the door more. I could now see his entire body. I lost my breath at that. I couldn't pretend this was some hallucination anymore. At this, I sat up and pressed my back against the wall. "It's okay." He said it so cheerfully. It gives me chills just remembering it. This is when I finally had the courage to run out of the room. This creep knew my name. My mom, still half asleep while she called the police, thought I had imagined it. Of course, by the time the police got there, he was already long gone. All that was left of him was that damned Crawlspace. I still never looked inside. Though now I kinda wish I did. Apparently he had been living in there. For how long? I don't know. But the officers who first arrived on the scene said that there were tally marks inside the Crawlspace. I didn't want to know how many. I didn't want to know whether he was marking days or weeks. I just wanted to leave that apartment, and we did. The police never found him, not for certain. They thought they found a homeless man who matched his description, but he was apparently unresponsive. I've always thought they didn't take it all that seriously. They just thought he was a squatter, even after I told them that he knew my name. They thought that given how long he had seemingly been squatting, he had probably just heard my name through the floorboards. Since that night, he has been the face I always see when there's an open door or closet. It's gotten easier with time, but I don't think it will ever leave me completely. Anyways, I guess we didn't actually have rats. Our house has a basement or crawl space that's only accessible from outside, through a door directly underneath my bedroom window, and about 10 feet from the bottom of the steps leading up to the back deck. It's a fairly large space, dirt floor and concrete walls, clean and plenty big enough for a grown man to stand up in. Until recently, it was half full of junk, mostly from our kitchen renovation, like paint cans and equipment and extra floor tiles and such, and had a padlock on it. We asked our yard guy to do some extra work that included cleaning it completely out, and when it was empty, we didn't bother putting the lock back on it. It has a sliding bolt on it that keeps it closed, in addition to the little loop thingy that you put the padlock on, so we just slid in the bolt and called it good. There was absolutely nothing in it, so no point in locking it. A couple weeks ago, my boyfriend was out on the back deck emptying the recycling bins and noticed the door open. Someone would have had to open it. The sliding bolt is a bit rusty and wouldn't easily come open and certainly wouldn't have opened on its own. He went and checked it out. Nobody there. Still completely empty. He thinks, well, okay, someone was poking around and didn't find anything interesting, but he did tell me about it and reminded me to keep the doors locked when he isn't home. A few days after that, I had the dog outside, and he ran straight to the door and started sniffing and scratching at it. And I noticed that it was slightly open again. I opened it, went inside, and walked around. Nobody there. Here we have a lot of trees and wildlife on our property, including raccoons and groundhogs, in addition to tons of squirrels. We have one huge oak tree that overhangs the roof covering the master bedroom, so it's nothing unusual to hear squirrels and other animals on the roof with their little pattering feet and scratching sounds. Yesterday I was here alone, laying in bed reading a book, the house completely silent. Usually the dog will lay in bed with me, but he was pacing and just acting weird. I was hearing the usual late afternoon squirrels or whatever on the roof, but then I hear a noise that is clearly the crawlspace door creaking open. It's directly underneath the window to my right, so I stand up and creep over to the window, crack the shades a tiny bit to peek out, and I see a guy starting up the steps to the back deck, having just exited the crawlspace. I immediately said, "Oh no," dropped the shades, and headed up the hall directly to the door he was heading for to confront him. At that same moment, my dog went nuts barking and beat me to the door, but he was nowhere in sight when I got there. I only saw him through the window for a second, and I only saw him from the back as he was heading up the steps. He was wearing a ball cap, so I couldn't even have said what color his hair was. I'm guessing my dog scared him away, but what the hell was he doing walking up on my porch in broad daylight with someone obviously home if he hadn't planned on knocking on the door? I waited a few minutes, then got my pepper spray out of my purse and went to investigate. Sure enough, the crawlspace door was open again. No one inside. When my boyfriend got home, he put the padlock back on it. Then he got my gun out of the safe where it's been for years and insisted I keep it under the mattress on my side of the bed. I only agreed to that after he loaded it with rat shot because I don't think I could shoot a human being, not even in self-defense, and rat shot won't do much more than scare someone with the noise of the gunshot. He was highly pissed at me that I went by myself into the basement to check things out, but I'm more angry than frightened. I don't know if I'm overreacting that just because someone had been inside the basement a few times, I automatically assumed that the man I saw was responsible and meant harm. I'm fairly certain he did come from there because I definitely heard the door open just seconds before I saw him on the steps. I just don't know if I'm freaking out over nothing. I'm keeping my doors locked just in case.